First of all, thank you so much for being with me.
Good to be here.
All right. And can I ask you to introduce yourself just so we have it at the top of the tape?
Sure. So my name is Maurice Green. I go by Mo, which is M-O, and I am a candidate for the position of North Carolina Superintendent of Public Instruction.
When did you decide to run for the office of State Superintendent? Was there something that inspired you?
So I will say I had actually retired from the Z. Smith Reynolds Foundation as its executive director. Certainly there were issues that were concerning to me, including the expansion of the taxpayer-funded private school voucher program. But it ultimately took a call from someone from the governor's office and a conversation with Governor Cooper to actually make the decision to ultimately decide that I would actually run for this position.
So Cooper's office planted the suggestion?
Yes, there was a gentleman in Governor Cooper's administration who reached out to me and encouraged. He said that the governor actually wanted me to consider running for the position, and so I gave it a lot of thought. Ultimately, met with Governor Cooper and made the decision to do so.
What do you think is the main role of state superintendent? It's an office, maybe not everyone really understands what they do.
Great. So I would say there are actually two main roles. So the first is to be the Chief Administrative Officer for public schools for the state of North Carolina. And so that is a position that helps to oversee and guide public schools for the state. So you're talking about 2,500 plus schools, 1.3, 1.4 million students, administers a budget of $11 billion annually, helps set the assessments, the accountability model, the standard course of study, licenses 100,000 educators. So that gives hopefully a general overview of what the Chief Administrative Officer position is. And then the second is to be the Chief Advocacy Officer, I like to say. And that means that this is a person that advocates on behalf of public schools for the state of North Carolina, providing lots of information to lots of different stakeholders, including the General Assembly, the governor, the State Board of Education, among others, and then advocates for what is needed to support and improve public schools in the state.
And of course, the General Assembly sets education policy. It's really passed by state lawmakers. Neither you nor your opponent have held a statewide office or been a member of the General Assembly before. How are you planning to build the relationships that you would need to influence those policies?
Great. So I would first of all say that I've had lots of experience working with the General Assembly. So when I was the attorney for Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools, and then even when I was deputy superintendent there, and then superintendent of Guilford County schools, had lots of conversations with lots of General Assembly members. And so there already are some instances where there are relationships there. Certainly there are many more folks that I do not have a relationship with, but the process would be the same. The way that I like to operate is to certainly listen to what General Assembly members are thinking and how they're approaching issues, engage in conversations with them, share what we're trying to push forward, and see where we might go from there. So the same would be true in this position, where I would, start off with having conversations, which would be mostly listening to what General Assembly members are saying. And a lot of that is, I think, certainly about public education, but it may be other things as well that might influence how one might think about public education ultimately, where we can find common ground and see we can move certain initiatives forward with the General Assembly.
Do you have policy initiatives in mind? When we saw Superintendent Truitt come in, she had really specific things that she was trying to get passed. If you're elected as state superintendent, what are some of the actions or policies that you would want to pursue, say, in the first 6 months?
So I always hesitate to try to answer a question like that. What are you going to do on the first day, the first 30 days, first 90 days, first 60
Well, I gave
days?
you at least 6
And
months.
so the way
First
that
year.
the way that I operate is the following. So first of all is we set a vision, which has already been put out there, which is to utilize a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., which is intelligence plus character. That is the goal of true education, and a focus on excellence. And so that's where it starts. The second thing we do, I've done before in other roles, is be sure that folks understand that there's a process that we'll ultimately utilize that will help us further develop that vision with strategies and initiatives and goals and things of that nature. There are some things certainly that I'm thinking about that will be
Like what?
of importance to moving our state public education system forward. Certainly, things, and we'll just pick out a few. I mean, I always tell folks that running a public school system is a complex endeavor. And so when I pick out a few, don't misunderstand that there are many, many other things that we could also then talk about. There will be things that I would say fall in the administrative side, that chief administrative officer side, and then some things that fall in the chief advocacy officer side, if you will. And so on the administrative side, we certainly want to continue the work that's being done around early literacy. I actually was a member of a cohort that worked with 5 other states on figuring out how we would best implement the science of reading in North Carolina, learning from them, they learning from us, etc. So we'll want to continue that work. I would also, certainly lift up work that we will want to do around character development, what that begins to look like. I don't want to pre-state that it's going to be exactly like what we did in Guilford County Schools, although there was certainly a lot of great effort and results put there around really engaging in what's called service learning as a methodology for helping to develop character. So that would be a second thing that certainly is on my mind on the administrative side. On the advocacy side, I would certainly lift up the need for us to spend a lot of time focused on compensation for educators and developing strategies to increase the compensation of educators across the board, excluding me, over a period of time. And so that will mean engaging with lots of folks and coming up with a plan for how we ultimately make that happen. So those are just a few of many things that I would lift up.
Yeah, you mentioned trying to improve reading and literacy initiatives. Do you agree with or disagree with the actions that State Superintendent Truitt took to try to improve literacy by, really retraining teachers in phonics?
Yes, and that's what I was saying. And this is a place where she and I would be in general agreement on. That what she was trying to do, I was certainly a believer in as well. As I said, I was part of one of 6 states that helped with that implementation. Are there some things that we would want to focus on? I would certainly say yes. One would be what we might do at the middle school level, because there are many struggling readers at the middle school level, so we'll want to do the science of reading and training our middle school educators as well in that regard. The types of materials that we might make available for our students to increase their level of engagement might be something that we would look at as well. But in the main, I'm in full support of what Superintendent Truitt and the State Board was doing with regards to the implementation of the science of reading.
School safety is on a lot of parents' minds. How would you seek to improve school safety statewide, and what kind of tools do you think schools should use?
Yeah, so with regards to school safety, again, this is a complex endeavor. of which I could talk about many, many things, having been in the role of actually leading a school district, around issues around safety, and then also being the deputy superintendent in another school district where we actually had our own separate law enforcement division that reported directly to me. So I have a lot that I could say about safety and how you try to improve safety in our schools. I'll lift up four things. The first of which is that we absolutely must have facilities that are as safe as we can make them, such that folks who have unfortunately not appropriate intentions can be prevented from entering our facilities. And so that would include certainly things that you can do with the schools with regards to entry points, cameras, what we call sort of hardening of facilities. The second thing that I would lift up is certainly around having effective relationships with law enforcement, and what that might mean will vary by district and by school, but certainly in our comprehensive middle and high schools, being sure that we have in most situations a school resource officer that can also help provide more safe environments. Always recognizing you're never going to get perfectly or 100% safe environments. The third is and with those first two, it's really about providing guidance to our local school districts about what is the best ways forward on these issues. The third thing that I would lift up is the need for us to have more mental health professionals in and around our students. Many of our students are struggling with issues, and we need to be sure that we provide them the kind of resources that they can work through those issues. This is a safety issue in many, many ways that will also help us then make all of our students feel welcome in our schools. And then the final thing is what I lifted up earlier, which is around character development. And that's a comprehensive program. I don't want to shortchange it, but it is a number of things that one can do to try to be sure that our students understand how they should comport themselves in our schools, how they should be in relationship with each other, even when they're in disagreement with each other, how we help guide them towards making better decisions, as well. So it's a combination of lots of things, and it's more than that, but those are at least four things that I would lift up that we would be wanting to work on.
We know that there's been a growing shortage of teachers, there are more vacancies in public schools. How would you try to address the shortage of certified teachers in North Carolina public schools?
Yeah, so I think it's a number of things that we need to focus on. The first of which is compensation for our certified teachers. So we find ourselves in a place where we are nearing, depending on the metrics that you're talking about, the bottom in the country with regards to what we pay our teachers. And so that's the first thing that we need to do is get the compensation levels up, and that will be on that advocacy side, working with our General Assembly in particular to help them understand how critically important it is that we increase the compensation levels. In addition to that, there are, I think, opportunities for us to engage in what I call compensation-related activities. So for us to think creatively about things like housing allowances or child care allowances that might not be direct dollars into a teacher's back pocket or wallet or purse or what have you, but indirectly has that effect. Then I think there are things that we need to be thinking about, assuming we can continue to make progress on those first two things, and I don't want to minimize those first two things as I talk about some other things. But working conditions become critically important for us to pay a lot of attention to. So here I'm talking about, certainly the amount of activities and responsibilities we place on our teachers, which makes it a very challenging job, much more challenging than it really ought to be. We ask of our teachers to teach classes with large class sizes, and then we ask them to do everything under the sun. In addition to doing that. And so, thinking about our working conditions, figuring out how we can alleviate some of those working conditions as well. And then the last thing I will just put out there is I do think that leadership matters. And so leadership in our schools becomes critically important. I have found over the many years of working that many educators are willing to follow, work with leaders that are effective, that are supportive of them. And so we got to be sure that we're recruiting, training, and equipping our principals and other school leaders to be effective school leaders.
Let's talk about special education a little bit. How do you think the state should best serve students with disabilities and learning differences?
Yeah, so first it starts with what is the expectation, and this is a place where I think we need to continue to develop our level of expectation for each and every one of our students, particularly our special education students. So, not thinking about them as not being able to, do the work, or we need to make them sort of secondary citizens. That is already the wrong level of expectation. These young people, our students, can actually do amazing things, and so we got to start by lifting that up. Then secondly, I do think that we've got to be sure that we are providing the kind of level of professional development for all of our educators, not just our special education educators, to work best with all of our students, particularly students with special needs. Third, again, this requires more resources. We need to appreciate that there are many situations where we are overwhelming our special education teachers by not providing the kind of supports around them so that they can do the work that they've been trained to do. So I'm talking about things like assistants, as an example. Things like, in certain situations, nurses and nurse assistants, depending on the level of needs for our special education students.
Really, and they spend a lot of time filling out paperwork too, is what I always hear.
Yeah, and so certainly that is true as well. I mean, we have this isn't a North Carolina issue. This is a national issue. And so I do think we should engage in more conversations about whether all of that is ultimately needed for us to deliver the kind of educational opportunities that we want to deliver for our students. And hopefully we can get to a place where we can alleviate some of the burden on all of the documentation and paperwork that's required for special education educators.
What distinguishes you from your opponent? What comes to mind first?
Yeah, so there are three things that I think I would lift up. The first would be experience. So you're talking about someone, when you're talking about the role that I'm talking about, that we are running for, which is to be the Chief Advocacy Officer and the Chief Administrative Officer for public schools for the state of North Carolina, I would lift up experience. I have actually been in a role where I have led and managed thousands of individuals, administered budgets in the billions, have done the sort of things that would equip me on day one to walk in and be able to move the position and public schools in general forward. Not to say that there aren't things that I have to learn, but that would be the first thing I would lift up is the level of experience. My opponent, she homeschools her children, nothing against homeschooling, but the magnitude of this job is one that puts the two of us at very distinct points in our ability and level of experience to do the job most effectively. So that'd be the first thing.
Well, and for anyone who isn't familiar with your background, how long were you superintendent? Can you talk about what is your experience in public schools?
Sure. So my experience in public schools included having been the superintendent of Guilford County Schools for 7.5 years. And so Guilford County Schools is the third largest district in the state of North Carolina, around 70,000 students, 10,000 employees. Before that, I was in Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools for 7.5 years in two roles. One was as the general counsel, the top lawyer, if you will, and then also as the chief operating officer and deputy superintendent. And so CMS is one of the two largest districts in the state with 130 or so thousand students, 18 plus thousand employees. So the magnitude of that. In addition to that, I served as the executive director for the Z. Smith Reynolds Foundation, which supports many things, including public education. And then finally, I'll just lift up, I've been part of and led any number of boards and organizations that focus on public school issues, including homeless students, the arts, athletics. I was the president of the North Carolina High School Athletic Association. So media, policy, community support. So I've been blessed to have had enormous experience working with and on behalf of our public schools.
Mara, you had more things to.
Yes.
One thing, just while we were talking about experience, Mara has also said that you lack experience because you were never a classroom teacher. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, so certainly it's true that I've never been a classroom teacher. I'm told, the first what's called non-traditional superintendent in the state of North Carolina. And so, again, I would just simply say that you can look at my resume and what we tried to do when I was superintendent to see that in this role, there are other things that I think are more important than having been a classroom teacher. You're talking about the chief administrative officer. You're basically a CEO of an organization, right? The second thing I would say is this. Take the major education organization for the state of North Carolina, NCAE, and they had the ability to select who they wanted to have as their endorsed candidate for this position. They could have chosen traditional educators, if you will. They chose me because I think they understand that they understand what I have done and how I approach the work. And what I would do on behalf of educators. I would also say, two other things. One is that people need to understand that I revere educators and will stand up for them and have done so. Again, resume speaks for itself, where there was an attempt to remove career status for educators. In North Carolina. For some that don't know, it's essentially like tenure at the high school level. At the higher education level, and it is the case that we challenge that. We being when the General Assembly tried to remove that for those who had actually earned it. We being the Durham County Board of Education, Guilford County Board of Education, and one individually named person in the lawsuit, and that was me. So this is the level of both experience and connections with our public schools that I would suggest that issue is one that really isn't worth spending a whole lot of time being worried about. from my vantage point.
Is there any criticism that you've heard about yourself on the Is there any criticism that you've heard about yourself on the campaign trail that you think is the most unfair or untrue?
Yeah. So before I answer that question, I'd like to answer the question.
You had to at more points. Yeah. Go
so,
on.
That's no worries. So the second thing would be belief in our public schools, where I believe in our public schools. My wife and I, we were blessed to have 2 children. We chose to put our children in public schools when we were also blessed to be able to make different choice if we wanted to. And to the point where I wrote a letter 6 years ago, no idea I'd be running for this position, when our youngest graduating, thanking our public school educators for the marvelous job that they had done educating our children. My opponent, I think, again, this is a huge distinction between the two of us, because she is the one that is on record having said all kinds of things about our public education system, including calling them socialist centers and indoctrination centers and cesspools of evil, lies, and destruction, or deception, I should say. And the list is long on those sorts of things. I think that if you want to not only be the chief administrative officer, but the chief advocacy officer, you ought to believe in our schools, and so it's a public school system. And so there's a second, I think, major distinction between us. And then the third, after experience, belief, would be character. And here, certainly tried to lift up what we tried to do in Guilford County School and what we want to take across the state in character development. Helping our young folks understand and how they should comport themselves and how they should be in relationship with each other, how they can be of service to their communities, as opposed to my opponent, who took her own children to the attempted insurrection, came back from the attempted insurrection, I'm talking about on January 6, 2021, came back from that, put her own cell phone video after there had been loss of life at the U.S. Capitol, and basically said, President Trump is in office 2 more weeks. He can set aside the United States Constitution, essentially invoke the Insurrection Act, which would allow the military to basically come in and take over and arrest people who helped certify the election for treason. My opponent is the one who has called for the executions of many, and the list is long, but they include like President Biden and Governor Cooper and Bill Gates and Barack Obama, who she wants to have executed publicly on pay-per-view as examples. She has done and said many things where she put her own words out there. This isn't a matter of someone misinterpreting what she said. This is a person who's put her own cell phone video disparaging folks of certain communities, including folks who speak anything other than English, or LGBTQ communities. Many, espouses QAnon conspiracy theories. There's many things, and so I would say character would be the third thing. So experience, belief, and character. I think there is a large distinction between the two of us in that regard. Now, your next question was what?
Yeah, well, I wanted to ask one follow-up, which is that Michelle Morrow has said that some of those statements were things that she said in jest, online, in the company of other adults, not something that she was saying, after she was running for public office. What did you think, though, when some of these things first surfaced, or when you first learned about some of these videos?
Yeah, so when I first saw them, I was appalled by the comments, and really called to me into question whether this is someone who is appropriate to be in a position that would be over our children. You see, so again, I have served as a superintendent of a school system and have had to deal with employees who say and do all sorts of things, right? Including things that might be similar in some regards to what Morrow says. And those are the kinds of folks that we say you can't be in our school system. And so it is mind-boggling to me then that the leader of the potential leader of our school system for the state of North Carolina could say these and do these sorts of things and then be allowed to be the leader of our school system. You think about, even, saying that we want to, set aside the United States Constitution. I think that calls into question whether, because this position, you swear an oath to uphold the United States Constitution. And so it, to me, calls into question whether this person can even be trusted to do that.
What criticism have you heard about yourself on the campaign trail that you think is unfair or untrue?
Yeah, so I don't know what criticisms folks have said of me. Maybe you will want to share some, and I'll be happy to respond to them.
I mean, I was kind of thinking more of saying that you weren't a classroom teacher, but I'm asking this question because I'm asking this of both of you.
Yeah, so you tell me what the criticism are, and I'll be happy to address them.
Well, she has said that you have never been a classroom teacher. She has said that Z. Smith Reynolds is a leftist organization that supports DEI or supports critical race theory.
Yeah, so we've talked about the comment about not having been a teacher. I don't know whether I need to repeat that with regards to raising concerns about the Z. Smith Reynolds Foundation. I think it's very unfortunate that anyone would want to lift up criticism of the Z. Smith Reynolds Foundation. This is a foundation that has done remarkable things for the state of North Carolina, including supporting, like, for example, domestic violence victims, and actually, as it relates to public education, has for many years funded the low wealth school districts in the long-standing Leandro litigation, trying to get more funding into our public schools. With regards to issues around diversity, equity, and inclusion, these are typical, things that she says about criticisms about DEI. Things like
I think she has said that it has funded Black Lives Matter too, and also can you maybe just take a moment to explain what Z. Smith Reynolds is?
Yeah, so Z. Smith Reynolds Foundation is a foundation that is a philanthropic organization that provides grants primarily to organizations in the state of North Carolina. So it only funds in the state of North Carolina. It funds many things in the state. On a given year, we'll make grants of $15+ million to organizations in the state of North Carolina. Yeah, so with regards to DEI, I think that certainly Z. Smith Reynolds has funded work related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. I don't think there's any apology around that because of how important these issues are. Diversity, our educators know how important these issues are. We have, for example, 390 different languages spoken in our state. Diversity exists within our school system. Questions around equity, this is simply an issue around being sure that each child gets what they need to be successful. And educators know that that means that certain children need different things, sometimes more than other children. And then certainly inclusion is absolutely something that we should be embracing. We want to be sure that all children feel welcome in our schools, regardless of their backgrounds. And so educators, certainly maybe in their own ways are being sure that we do the sorts of things that she wants to try to raise criticisms about. I actually think this is really an attempt to try to distort and remove the focus from herself and all of the horrible things she has directly said about various groups, the sorts of things that we've already lifted up about wanting to execute people, set aside the U.S. Constitution, and the like.
What makes a good teacher? This is my last scripted question.
Right. So, what makes a good teacher, I think, is a number of things. First of all, would start with a person who has high expectations for their students, that they can achieve at exceedingly high levels. Secondly, that they have gathered or will be gathering the kind of educational background and professional development so that they can best impart that information and knowledge to their students. Third would be that they are the kind of folks that find ways, and teachers do it in different ways, but encourage students to be their best selves and show up academically as their best selves, and also in other ways show up as great individuals. And so they're dedicated to their craft and to their students.
One thing that stood out to me in hearing you speak tonight is you talked about the night of the primary election and how that changed how you thought about this race. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so certainly before the primary, I was certainly concerned about the direction of our public schools, but I didn't know who would win on the Republican side, but I had some sense that it would be Catherine Truitt, the incumbent, and that we would be continuing to have conversations about how best to move our public system forward, but it would always be in the context of we believe in the public school system. We believe in the words in the North Carolina Constitution with regards to our public schools. And so it was that night when I'd heard a little bit about Michelle Marr, and I hadn't paid that close attention to her, but it was that night that I said, well, now that she's going to be the Republican nominee, let me do a little bit more exploration about her. And wow. Even that night, I had to say to myself, I can't even read all of the things that are out there that night, because it was so far out there that it made one wonder, how is this person, equipped to be, next to our children. And so, and then when I, continued to understand more about sort of what she has said about, for example, the abolishment of the State Board of Education, which oversees our public schools and sets policies and procedures for our public schools, I'm thinking we are at a whole different place. This is no longer about, I might have one way of thinking about how to move public schools forward. Catherine Truitt might have a different way, but we all sort of are in belief of our public schools. To having someone who has encouraged parents not to send their children to public schools, wants to abolish, the entity that helps oversee our public schools, has said all these dangerous things. I'm thinking we're at a whole different place. And so I do believe that this has crystallized the fact that the very soul of public education is on the ballot in the election of this position, and that now is the time for anyone who is a champion of public education to be sure that their voice is heard in this election.
Thank you so much for your time, for sitting with me after your event. I so appreciate it. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thanks for allowing me the opportunity to share a bit this evening.